What started out as an idea to do a year-long fly-on-the-wall style film about former Prime Minister Helen Clark turned out to be a documentary about an historic process.
Madam Clark, you are virtually a household name within the UN system. You could even be described as the establishment candidate.
I have never been an establishment candidate for anything.
Renowned New Zealand filmmaker Gaylene Preston's film My Year with Helen became a study of gender politics and an insight into the closed world of international diplomacy at the UN at a time when the UN was trying to be transparent in its appointment of its 9th Secretary General.
It's going to be more interesting than the Olympics.
It is more interesting than the Olympics.
It's the story of Helen Clark, the third-ranked employee at the UN, who'd been running the UN development program for more than 7 years, vying for the top UN job vacated by Ban Ki-moon. Clark ultimately lost out to former Portuguese Prime Minister Antonio Guterres. He became the 9th man to be appointed US Secretary General. There has never been a woman in the job. Gaylene Preston documented the whole process, and her film My Year with Helen is in cinemas August 31. She joins me now, as does the subject herself, Helen Clark. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
It is, and well done on the film.
Well, thank you, Wallace.
Tell me first up, Gaylene, I mean, you had no idea Helen Clark intended to try to become the first woman Secretary General of the UN. You had no idea.
Well, it doesn't reflect well upon me that I didn't even know the job was coming up. You know, because I'm a filmmaker and I sort of like to find things out as my cameras are rolling. It keeps it fresh. So I'm not a journalist and I don't have a journalist approach. And it just very gradually dawned on me that this thing was bigger than both of us.
And you got a phone call from Gaylene, is that right? How did it start?
I think Gaylene probably emailed me, and then we had a discussion. She came around, or we met somewhere, and yeah, she put it to me that the world was in a bit of a bad way, but that I seemed to be getting on and doing the best I could in the development work I was doing. So maybe she'd want to do a movie about how you made change and what kept me optimistic and so on. That's how it started.
Did you have any reservations? Because in terms of these observational documentary styles, it's not an easy thing to open yourself up.
Well, inevitably there are limitations on what I can say as a public figure, and at that point, you know, obviously a senior UN official. And also a lot of the meetings that I had can't really be public meetings with a camera, because they're private meetings, they're work meetings, they're people coming to meet you from governments which have things to say. They don't want that on camera. So there were those sort of limitations. But I think probably the greater limitations Gaylene faced was the UN bureaucracy and where she could get access and what corridors at what times.
Well, tell us about that, because you get a sense of it. I mean, what we enter into as a viewer is a universe of bureaucracy, vast engine, and you had to deal with it. How did you deal with it?
Well, it's strange, you know, Wallace, because as soon as you're called the media, I mean, I never think I am the media because I'm a documentary maker, but once you're labelled media, there's just this whole setup designed to stop you finding out anything. And it's crazy because the UN is always wanting more publicity about what it does. People constantly whinge that nobody's really covering properly what the UN does unless it's a whole big crisis. But once you just wander around with a big M on your forehead. I was like a naughty fourth former at big school. With a camera, you're just trouble.
Give us an example. So you go to a spokesperson and you want to get access to a particular meeting and you get the knockback. Well,
there are some meetings that are public, but you still have to apply to be part of MALU, which is the Media Liaison Unit. So they're kind of the media prevention officers. And you have to do all these applications, and partway through the film, they changed their system from quill to actual computer, and that caused a whole lot of trouble. I tell you what, I could go on. It's really difficult. It's very difficult.
How long did it take you to get inculcated into the UN process? Did it take a long time?
You see, what Gaylene is describing is interaction with the UN Secretariat. That was a completely different beast from where I was. I sat across the road as administrator of the UN Development Programme. And when I came, I came with sort of, Kiwi way of getting bureaucracy responsive, mainstream, proactive. And UNDP, to its credit, rose to the occasion. We were much less bureaucratic. We were able to deal with these things. Now, still have stayed there another 10 years, which I wouldn't have wanted to do. There was more to be done, but it was nothing like what Gaylene was facing. In the funds and programs, which is what UNDP was, we had a lot of latitude.
And we were sheltered there. When we were across the road, we were tickety-boo. We'd go over there to have a whinge. But basically, we were working with Gemma Gracewood. She has a little baby. She has to breastfeed her baby. In order for her to go and breastfeed her baby, she has to leave the UN building, go through all the procedures with security, find her baby, find a spot to breastfeed it. Well, of course, it's going to be across the road at the UNDP, and then come back and do all that again. So
You're kidding? This is the UN?
That's, yeah.
Mm. Yeah, it's the 21st century.
That's got to change.
It has.
Oh.
It has got to change.
Because this is interesting because it's quite a riveting watch. It could have been quite dull. It couldn't have been. Lots of meetings, closed door process. You couldn't film. But you ended up travelling to several countries, and importantly, the new selection process for the Secretary General at the UN ended up delivering quite a dramatic element, described by one campaigner in the film as more exciting than the Olympics.
Yeah, but let's get real about this. This process had the appearance of transparency when it was anything but. And in some senses it almost made it worse because it gave the appearance of being open, with candidates openly presenting in the big Al Jazeera debate and so on. But actually none of that had the slightest bit of impact on the decision. If you look at the open hearings, by common agreement, my appearance at the General Assembly was probably one of the two best, the other being Antonio Guterres, who, like me, was a former Prime Minister and had presentation skills. I was certainly deemed to be, probably right up at the top, if not the top performer in the Al Jazeera debate. I won the social media war. I had the people's vote. I had the staff vote. None of that mattered because the decision was made in the Security Council, and particularly in discussion between the 5 permanent members. And they then give one name to the General Assembly that votes it up or down. It's never going to vote it down. It takes the one name from the 5 people, with the 10 elected members paying a kind of bit role.
That's quite a strong allegation to make.
No, but it's obvious. That is how it is done. So it gave the appearance of transparency, but there was nothing transparent about it.
We documented
Do you agree with that?
Absolutely, we totally did. We documented people believing in that apparent transparency.
And then feeling disappointed. Look, Wallace, the World Health Organization has just elected a new Director General. They had a genuine election. They had rounds of balloting, and in these final rounds, all the member states voted till they got someone with a clear majority. In my opinion, the radical change would be to have the UN General Assembly empowered to make the decision. You have continuous balloting on preferential basis till someone emerges with a majority.
How likely do you think is that?
Well, probably not very likely, which is sad, because if the UN doesn't move with the times, it becomes irrelevant. And we need a relevant UN, not an irrelevant one. There were 6 straw polls, weren't there? You've talked a bit about this, a voting process that whittle the contenders down, conducted in the selection process, and for the benefit of our listeners, each of the member countries votes, and the choice of votes is 1 encourage, 2 discourage, or 3 no or abstain. But at any point, any of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, the P5 as they're known, that is China, France, Russia, the UK and the US, can veto any candidate, can't they? So it's quite a strange process. Well, over the years, I think many people feel that the Security Council permanent members have accrued far too much power towards themselves. Now, in the balloting process, there wasn't, through the straw ballots, a differentiation between the permanent members and the non-permanent, but they got to a point, and I think it was probably the 7th ballot or whatever, where they used coloured cards, and those are the veto cards. Now, the veto card isn't necessarily a veto, but it's a sign that there is an objection which would have to be dealt with. For example, the French are said in the past to have vetoed Kofi Annan and Ban Ki-moon right through to the last stage when they undertake to then study French hard and the French get a senior position. So these things are negotiable, right? That's the way it works. But the problem for me was that we couldn't get it to the point where there was a genuine negotiation. Yeah. There never was.
Gaylene, did you know much about this process before you entered into documenting this? I mean, how much did you, did you have to get up to speed quite fast because it's quite convoluted?
Well, I followed what I could because, in the end, it doesn't really matter what I know as a filmmaker. If you're making a fly-on-the-wall documentary, whatever you're doing, you have to film it. If you can know it, but if you can't film it, it isn't there. So I found it better to pay enormous attention to what was going on, but actually just follow proceedings. And it's quite interesting because I think a lot of other people who I thought would know didn't know either.
Really?
Yeah, because it was every time anybody said anything, it was like, this is a historic process. It's never happened like this before.
Oh, yeah.
So nobody knew. So if I tried to find out, I wouldn't have had much luck anyway. And actually, in the film, you can see that the media, who are well-heeled media, who have lots of sources, and that's funny. You know, it's all secret, except people have all these sources. And everybody then in the media starts talking about what is and isn't going to happen and a whole lot of things, talking knowledgeably, and they don't know any more than I do. So I just filmed what I could of what was going down, and my main reaction all year was, holy cow. and then you put it all together, and it's riveting because I think the audience is saying that. They're going, good Lord.
There is one person in your film who really kind of shines a light on the process. One reporter, I can't recall who his name is, one reporter or camera person. He's always there watching, and you often go to him. But he was saying something very, very, very interesting, saying that the winning candidate can't ever really rock the boat, and if you ever have a chance of rocking the boat, you're not going to get elected.
Well, I think that's quite a significant factor.
Yeah.
And I think among the many reasons why I couldn't come through was that I'm known as a strong, independent-minded person, and I come from an independent-minded country. Now, this is very threatening to some people. Combine it with being a woman, it's probably an insuperable obstacle.
There's the group of women campaigning strongly for a women's Secretary-General was central to kind of building the tension, weren't they? In the film, Gaylene, we meet quite an extraordinary advocate in Yale University politics lecturer, Dr. Jean Krasnow. What did you make of these advocates?
Well, early on, the campaign for Women's Secretary-General did quite well. And even among the member state ambassadors at the UN, there was a group for Friends of a Woman SG. But I have to say, really, the whole thing lost a lot of traction as the realpolitik kicked in. And from the time of that first ballot, where the women candidates were really all doing reasonably badly, the steam went out of it, which was unfortunate.
What did you make of the advocates? They were very strong, and they were very, very upset when Helen or the other, I think it was the other candidate, didn't make it, woman candidate.
Well, they had reason to be optimistic because they had really done a lot of work to make sure that countries were going to nominate women, and that did happen. So they felt that with was it 6 or 7?
7.
7, with 7 well-qualified women, because, you know, the argument is always, oh, but where do you find these women? They're not qualified. You know, and anyway, if we have a woman, well, we still want the best candidate. You know, and that kind of is suddenly we're going to raise the bar. Could be World War III out there. So somehow when there's women involved, the bar gets raised. And now it's about the best candidate. But I don't think it ever was about the best candidate.
It was never about the best candidate.
And so the people who'd spent a considerable amount of time lobbying countries really did get very disappointed and actually outraged.
There are Helen, there are some really nice personal moments, I suppose you could say, some nice insights in the film as well. A terrific part where you come home and you knock up 90 meals for your 95-year-old dad, George. So and it's very, very endearing, you know, seeing you and your father together, cooking things like, what is it, chili con carne, I think it is, and beef and beer stew and lamb curry.
Keep it simple.
keep it simple. But is that really what you'd do? You'd make a whole lot of meals for him. He's got the meals for half a year or whatever.
So about 6 years ago, my mother sadly passed away, and I have 3 sisters, and obviously we had to think, how's Dad going to cope? Well, Dad's very resilient. But you know, men left to themselves won't cook a proper meat meal with protein. They might fry a sausage or a piece of steak or something. And so all those years I was in New York, I would spend all my vacation time in New Zealand, which is about 6 weeks a year, in 2 blocks. And I decided the least I could do would be to put a lot of meals in the freezer for Dad. So he had a proper meat meal at night. He still does the garden at 95, and he has his own veggies, and he'll cook those. But to be able to have some protein from the freezer is pretty important. So that's what I've been doing for all those years.
And I think, was it Gaylene who said your diary is nothing short of extraordinary in New York, extraordinarily busy, and yet, you still have time to phone your dad every night?
Yes, every night, from wherever.
High fives. I think that's fantastic.
And I think it absolutely shows how women, whenever they do a job, they are going to do it differently. You know, it's
do you
just
think?
Yeah. I think that's what we do. We always have a part of our brain that's ticking along, that's looking after that kind of stuff. It's just kind of core business, and it's not a weakness. It's actually a strength. That's why I put it in the film. So apart from a lovely relationship, so we're gonna put George forward as best support. Best supporting actor. Best support role.
Has George seen the film?
No, he hasn't seen the film. I think Gaylene might have promised him a private showing.
Yeah, we're taking it up. We're taking it up there.
Oh, fantastic. Another small aspect, Helen, is the social media part of it. I mean, and you really are across your Snapchats, across your Instagrams, Facebook, Twitter, right into it. And there was a young political researcher who was part of the film, and she was so excited that you had tweeted her research, and when she got to meet you and was beside herself taking photos, she said she felt you were the candidate who connected with people like her. I mean, how important was that?
I think it was important in sort of bringing the issues alive to younger people. And I have no doubt I won the social media war. I was the social media queen at the UN for years. They do rankings, you know, social media 500. I was always first. And often people say, where do you get the time to do this? If it's important, you find the time. You're in a cab, you're on the way to the airport, you're sitting in the transit lounge. There's always downtime to put an idea or a thought out there. I regard every tweet as a mini press statement, so they've all got thought behind them, but you can communicate enormously directly to the public.
I suppose it depends on how you do it, though, Helen, because the other person that does the same technique is Donald Trump.
I think he's a bit faster on the keyboard.
Spelling not so good.
Spelling not so good. But in the end, rather ironically, the new Secretary General had virtually no social media presence. Portugal's Antonio Guterres, old school boys club, and as O'Reilly put it, the millennials obviously don't have a lot of power yet. I thought that was quite fairly significant.
Well, that's right. And could I have run a campaign where I didn't engage publicly? Of course not. But he ran a different kind of campaign, and in the end, he was successful. So, you know, what do we read into that?
At the end of the day, you gave it a shot. You didn't get it. Your feelings now?
Well, I've always had a capacity to shut the door on something and move on to the next thing. You know, I went through all the hard knocks of New Zealand politics all those years. You win some, you lose some. Winning's the easy bit. You know, it's losing, I think, that brings out people's character. So you just say, right, I gave it my best shot. I had fantastic backing from New Zealand government, New Zealand public. I did everything I could, you know. Didn't work out. Okay, let's find something else to do.
What did you learn, Gaylene, about Helen Clark that you perhaps didn't know?
I think I did know, but I saw it in action, and that's all about resilience. Because I think, speaking for myself, you know, you can do something you're really proud of, and maybe it doesn't click, maybe people hate it at the time, you know, and it's pretty bruising. Artists have to be very sensitive, but we also have to be like politicians. You know, it's kind of difficult. And so I learned about resilience.
Which is really what the film's about, do you think?
I think it is, yeah. You know, I think having a purpose is what sees you through. If you haven't got a purpose, you're far more vulnerable. But I think I learned all this stuff about the best candidate and, you know, all that stuff. You go, oh, goodness me, really, we need to be thinking differently. And I also learned that we should be very proud of ourselves in New Zealand, and maybe we don't pay enough attention to our own recent history, because when you look on the global stage and you think, well, at a certain moment in time in New Zealand, in my lifetime, we had a Prime Minister, a Secretary, Governor-General, a head
Attorney General, a Speaker, the head of the biggest corporation, the Cabinet Secretary, head of the Law Society, accountancy profession. Women did it all.
All at the same time, not one at a time.
Do you agree with what Gaylene's saying?
Critical mass.
Yeah.
We should be remembering that.
Look, very few countries have experienced this. And, you know, we still have countries that elect absolutely no women to their parliament. One, a close neighbour, Papua New Guinea, just had elections. 167 women ran for the 111 constituencies. Not a single one was elected. I mean, this was the environment, you know, that I was running to lead the UN in, that many countries have never had a woman leader. Most countries have never had a woman leader. Most have never had very many women prominent in their politics or public life at all.
There's a film I've only seen fairly recently, actually, Gaylene, a couple of years ago, and I loved it. Bread and Roses, I think it's called.
Brilliant film.
Sonia Davies. Yeah. What an extraordinary woman. And I was just thinking, reminded me last night of, is this film in a way, My Year with Helen, some sort of companion piece perhaps?
It's been suggested. I hadn't thought of it. I mean, I always see, if I hadn't known Sonia, I don't think I'd know Helen. And
how so?
Well, I worked closely with Sonia. Sonia was a mate of mine. I used to cartoon for the Shop Employees Union when Sonia was part of it. And so Sonia was a mate of mine, and it was through Sonia that I got to know more about mainstream politics as a practitioner. But, you know, we stand on giants' shoulders, and it's definitely worth remembering. And there always continues to be this debate about, you know, why do we need women? Really, how different is it? And why should we do it? And, you know, women are people after all. And I'm going to mention a film that I just saw last week at the film festival. It's called Waru. It's by 6 Māori filmmakers. And if you ever wanted, I don't want to have that discussion ever again, women behind the camera, until whoever I'm talking with has seen Waru, because then we will see why we need women behind the camera. And we need women leaders. And I've always thought, well, I'm not so interested in women leaders, really. You know, I'm really interested in the downtrodden and the misunderstood and the people who really need a lot of resources. But making this film has made me realise how very important women leadership, female leadership is very important.
Gaylene, did you ever get a feeling the film would be better depending on whether Helen won or lost? Did you care about the ending?
Well, I had to pay great. I mean, you'd be silly. You have to know about the beginning, and the beginning and the ending are usually linked. So how you begin has to have some, how you end has to have some relevance to the beginning. It's just a thing, a storytelling thing. I don't think the film would be better or worse given whatever happened with Helen, but I must say that there's certainly got a very clear kaupapa from the film, given what happened.
The reality of life is that not every story has a happy ending.
In the movies,
hey,
they're supposed to.
I say to people, worse things can happen in life than losing an election as Prime Minister or Secretary General. You haven't been struck down by cancer or a heart attack or something devastatingly catastrophic. So, let's put this in perspective. It's no more than you lost an election. But actually, you've got your health, you've got your dignity, you've got other things to look forward to.
And the film speaks much more clearly around gender issues.
Jean Krasno in the film said when a man was appointed, quoting, "I'm so disappointed for the women in the world. If you want the top position, you can't have it. The moment has gone." Helen, do you think the moment is gone?
No, I think women have to regroup for next time, whenever it is. Whether the Secretary-General serves one term or two, we don't know. But women have to be ready, and I think that we need to identify who has a really good chance and pile in behind that person and really give it the best shot to make the 10th Secretary-General a woman Secretary-General.
There's a quote, just finally, in the film, Helen, and I think it goes along something along the lines of people want change, they don't want to live in poverty. What are the steps that will bring about that change? That's what you say in the film. And it kind of reminds me of the talk today about New Zealand society in 2017. There's a lot of talk about poverty right now in Aotearoa. What do you make of that?
Well, there is poverty, and I think there's a number of issues behind that. One is housing costs in our big cities like Auckland. It's very, very tough. And when you see the stories about families sleeping in their cars, it's horrible. No family should sleep in a car. You really need a determined attack on that, and it's got to come through public policy. It can't be solved by charity. It's got to come through public policy that makes a decent home for every family and individual a priority. Simple as that. I think working for families is extremely important in ensuring that families have the money they need to bring up their kids. And then there's the whole social wage around the access to healthcare. I'm noticing how the costs of going to the doctor have crept up in New Zealand over the years. So you have to be relentless on these things if you want to really get on top of poverty.
Coming back from the lights of Manhattan, back to perhaps a bit more time in New Zealand society, what do you see here? What do you see in New Zealand right now? Are we going in the right direction or otherwise?
Well, look, I have been working with and for the poorest countries in the world. So, of course, if I'm going to compare the state of things in New Zealand with Burkina Faso, I'm going to say we have it pretty good. But let us acknowledge the huge inequalities in our own society, which have widened a lot. And we can't pull the ladder up after ourselves if we've been successful. We need to look at the whole society and say, is everybody getting a fair shake here? And the answer clearly is no, and that needs action.
It needs action, especially because it's really good self-interest, because any group is only as strong as its weakest link. It applies to, a necklace, and it's a physical fact, and it's true of society. So if you're allowing everybody to moulder in terrible, abject poverty, we shouldn't have that in New Zealand. We've got less people living here than Melbourne.
Well, I think societies are always judged by how they treat the least fortunate members, and we need to look in the mirror and say, how will we be judged?
It's a great way to end the interview, but finally, briefly, the both of you, what's next for you, Helen?
Well, the diary is too full. I spent a lot of the night kind of batting away requests to do this, that or the other, but no, I'm in a position now to pick and choose what I want to do. I've just had a very, very good vacation. doing something I've always wanted to do, which was go on the Trans-Siberian Railway.
You've been on it? Is it worth doing?
Absolutely. Couldn't recommend it more highly. But apart from that, you know, look, there's lots of invitations to do this, that and the other, and I'm kind of busy.
You, Gaylene?
Well, I've been run off my feet because, you know, it takes 2 years to make My Year with Helen, and Helen strides forward. But I've got another 6 months at least work with the film. And then, I don't know, I might do the Trans-Siberian. Sounds good.
You can film it.
I've decided after that film that I'm going to ring my mum every night, or at least try to.
Well, you know.
You can do it. If Helen Clark can do it, I can do it. Helen Clark, Gaylene Preston, thank you very much for being on the show.
Thanks, Wallace. Always a pleasure.